fun too. We're gonna have this forever, and it's gonna be nice. So, okay.
Okay, I'm ready when you are.
Where were you born, Granddad?
Sage, I was born in Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay.
My father was a welder during the war. He did not go to the war because he had an occupation that was critical to the war. It was more important for him to be able to weld a plane together than it was for him to fight in the field.
How did Granny and everybody else react when you had to go to war?
Well, your granny and I were married on Thanksgiving Day, 1968, and I was drafted just after Christmas, 1968, and reported for duty in Bedford County, Virginia, on February 20, 1969. And she was very upset. We had not been married very long, and of course she was an only child, so she didn't have any brothers or sisters to lean on. She was kind of all by herself, and so she was naturally very apprehensive about what the future may hold.
Remember, she sent you a lot of letters, right?
Excuse me?
She sent you a lot of letters, right?
Granny wrote to me every single day I was in Vietnam. And sometimes I would not receive any mail for 2 or even 3 weeks. And then I would get a stack of letters. They would bring them out to the field where I was in the jungle, and they would bring those out with food, and water, fresh canteen water, and sea rations to eat, and ammunition, medical supplies, those kinds of things. And they would have a mail drop, bring us mail, usually.
What branch were you in?
I was the United States Army.
You're a medic, right?
I was a medic.
Okay.
Not only was I a medic, but I was a combat medic, which means I was in the theater of fighting battles. But also, when I first arrived in Vietnam, I was not sent to the field. I was actually on a big base camp, and we would receive mortar fire and things, but I was not in the field. But then about a month later, less than a month later, I was put into a field unit and sent into the field.
I remember the story, you jumped out of a helicopter once?
That was the main source of transportation in Vietnam, because there were very few roads in the jungle, and there's a rainy season that lasts for about 4.5 months. And the part of Vietnam Vietnam is about 1,000. Vietnam as a country, it's now no longer, South Vietnam no longer exists. It's just Vietnam now, and it's communist. And it's much, much longer than 1,000 miles, but the country itself is about 1,000 miles long, but only about 50 to 60 miles wide. So it's a long, skinny country. I've described it in my book that I wrote. It was kind of like a big shriveled up banana. That's about what the country looks like a shriveled up banana. And helicopters, those were the main source of transportation, and there were 3 different kinds of helicopters. There was the Huey, which is the main helicopter you see on television shows and things like that. And then there was the light observation helicopter that's called a LOACH, Light Observation Helicopter, LOH. And those were used for generals and higher ranking officers who would fly above the battles about a half a mile up, 2 miles, where they couldn't be hurt. And they would fly around. And then we had a 2-bladed helicopter called a Chinook. And they would bring water trailers out to us. They would bring big pallets of ammunition out to us, food out to us. and once in a while they would extract injured soldiers, but most of the time they were just transporting a lot of supplies.
So what was training like for you?
Well, Sage, I was drafted in Bedford County, Virginia, and rode a bus up to Roanoke, Virginia, where we're now talking from, to the Army station there, and that's where we swore in. We had to swear our allegiance to the country, and we were inducted. That's called induction. You were inducted into the military. And then we were there, and they fed us, and then put us on a bus and sent me to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And it was in the end of February the 20th. And when we arrived there, I was still in my civilian clothes. And then they sent us through a line, shaved our heads off. And my head was, I didn't have a whole lot of hair, but a lot of those guys had real long hair, and they would shave the hair off, and then they'd send them through a line and give you a big duffel bag, and then start putting your shoes, your boots in there, and your caps in there, your winter gear, because it was wintertime when I went through basic training, and shortly thereafter, you were put in a platoon of about 30 people, and then a drill sergeant was assigned to you, and then you began training, and you would do a thing called fallout, which gets up in the morning, and you go out and you stand at attention, and about a platoon, about 30 guys, and then we would have to crawl on our hands and knees like that to the mess hall to eat breakfast, and then we were permitted to walk back, and then we started training, that physical training, a lot of physical training, and I was way ahead of that curve because I was almost a perfect physical specimen then, and it was a piece of cake for me, but it was really, really hard for a lot of those guys who came from the cities and kids who really were not in shape. Some of them were overweight and stuff like that. And then we were trained to protect ourselves, hand-to-hand fighting, and also the use of weaponry, which is rifles mostly. And we did that for 8 weeks. And then after those 8 weeks, we were called to a formation of people, and they gave us a sheet of paper about that long, 8 by 11 sheet of paper, and it has your name on it, Bolding Charles B, and my service number. My service number was 529432006, and we had dog tags, and my dog tags, I was in the Army at a strange time because the dog tags changed from a serial number, which was a random number, to your social security number. So I have 2 sets of dog tags. I'm one of the very few people that's ever served in the United States military with those. Probably less than 5,000 people have 2 sets of dog tags, and I'm one of those 5,000. And we were given a sheet of paper, and it says where you're going. So it says you're going to San Antonio, Texas. That's where the Alamo is, and the Army base there is a medical training station. It says you're going to be trained as a medic. And so I went through. I flew by airplane to Texas, and the end of May of 1969, and started training as a medic. And it's just like going through medical school. It's the same thing, except it doesn't last that long.
Okay. How long do you think it took to do medical school?
It was 12 weeks.
And then did you get?
It's 3 months. And then after that, and by the way, your granddad, I was an honor graduate. I was one of 10 guys out of almost 500 to score the highest test at the end. So I was an honor graduate and had that information in the safe downstairs that you and your two cousins will have someday to peruse, to read. And then, after that training, we got another sheet of paper before we left medical school, and that was what's going to happen to you, where you're going next. And there were all kind of rumors about where our class would go. Most of them said, well, it said that we were all going to Alaska. And so when I talked with your granny on the phone, I said, there's some talk about us going to Alaska, the whole class. But when we got the orders itself, it said Vietnam. So it was a really bad time of the war because a lot of people were being killed, and medics and radio telephone operators, we call them RTOs. They had a big pack on their back and an aerial that went up 10 feet. And medics and RTOs were often sought to be killed quickly because the radio guys had the capacity to call in help, either through artillery or air strikes or another unit that wasn't too far away to come and help. And of course the medic is psychologically the most important person in a company or in a platoon, because if when someone is injured, and it happens constantly, that's the one person who they rely on to save their lives. And so I had a really important job, but a stressful one, and I had to be very, very proactive in everything I did, because any mistake that I made, not only am I dead or badly injured, but there's nobody there to help anybody when they're badly injured. So there's a lot of pressure on me.
How did that pressure feel? Were you really overwhelmed?
Well, I had a choice to be overwhelmed or not, and my choice was to try to survive. And of course, I grew up very poor, and I grew up very hard, and that was a great advantage for me, because I wasn't some rich kid, and so I grew up in the woods down in the mountain there, and I was shooting guns when I was 8 years old. I was hunting squirrels and rabbits and ducks and quail when I was just a tiny boy. So the use of a firearm was as natural to me as eating with a spoon and fork at the dinner table. And so so I had a choice, Sage, of doing that. I could buckle under the pressure, or I could stand up. And I had been an athlete too, and athletes gain a lot. You've been an athlete, so you understand that you're under pressure when you do things like that, because other people are relying on you, and so I chose to bear it out and do the best I could do, and that's all anybody can do in a war situation, because your survival is based on three things in battle. The most important one you have absolutely no control over, and that is a thing called chance. A bullet or a grenade, a fragmentation, something that explodes, or a booby trap, all those things can just happen. You have no control over it. So chance is one of them. And then the next thing is volume. You never know how much volume. You could encounter an enemy force that is 10 times your size, and you just don't have much chance against that, especially if they catch you by surprise. And finally, the last one is something that I did have control over, Sage, And that it was my own preparation, my own awareness, and my own volition. In other words, my ability to make a decision very fast. And I was about as good as you can get at that. Because other than injuring my back, jumping out of a helicopter at about the height of a telephone pole with about 100 pounds of material on my back and my M16 in my right hand and a medical bag that weighed about 30 pounds in my left hand, other than that, I had nothing to do but jump out of this helicopter. It was going to be crashed. It didn't crash in this circumstance, but it was just a freak accident that it was able to continue to fly. But there were a lot of dying and dead young guys like myself on this hot LZ, a landing zone underneath me, and I just decided I was already out on the skid of the helicopter to get off, and it was rainy season. The rainy season had started in May, and my boots slipped like that. When my boots slipped, I had a choice to either dive back into the helicopter or grab the monkey strap that held the gunner. There's a big strap that's strapped to the back of the door gunner, and that's called a monkey strap. And if he's hit or falls, then his body will stay with the helicopter. He'll be dangling out there, but he'll still be with it. But I had a choice, so I dropped to the earth, and other than injuring my hip, which is now bad enough that I'm going to have my hip replaced after 53 years, I was never injured. I was eaten up by mosquitoes and leeches and things like that, but I never was hit by a bullet, and I was never hit by a fragmentation, or I never stepped on a booby trap. But I was very, very careful. I was very attuned to my surroundings. I never took a step that I did not have to take. I never stood up when I could crouch. I never crouched when I could lie down flat on the ground. So I used every mathematical probability of keeping myself alive. And that had a great deal to do with it, I'm certain.
What's your most vivid memory of like saving people, being in combat? Like,
Well, actually, Sage, it's something that has bothered me, and I don't know that I should tell you this because you're still a very young age, and I don't want to traumatize you because I love you dearly. But the most memorable thing, negative memorable thing that happened the whole time I was there was when I first arrived in Vietnam. I was on a very controlled situation, relatively safe for about a week and a half. During that time, there was a call that out on the roadway, just an old dirt road that ran through the jungle like, there had been an ambush. And that's where the enemy waits for you to come down the road, and then they start shooting at you, firing at you, killing people, and setting off explosions. We call them command detonated explosions. That's where they have two wires and have them on a battery, and they have wire running out into a road or into a rice paddy or field or somewhere like that, and they wait until 4 or 5 American soldiers get real close to it, and then they'll push it like that and explode it. And this was not the case in this situation, but there was an ambush on several trucks coming down this path, and it was during the afternoon. It was through a little village, a little Vietnamese village, and children, small children, just like you, Charles and James and other small children play. They were playing. The children play universally throughout the world, and they don't really understand war. But anyway, they hollered for me to come out there. That one of the trucks, when when the North Vietnamese or Viet Cong, we're really not sure which one it was, they started firing at these trucks. One of the trucks, the driver was killed, and when he was killed, of course, he was no longer steering the thing, and it ran off and ran through a little house, a little hut, a little straw hut, called a hooch, and a little child about 4 years old had been run over, hit by the bumper of the truck. And when I went over there, there was a big place about that, bigger than a silver dollar, on the back of his head that was real bloody, mashed. And it was just at twilight, which is dark, and I had a little army flashlight with me, and we had a flashlight about this long, and it had a little crook on the end of it. And then I had different kind of lenses, but I always used a red lens, because the red lens doesn't show in the dark very well. I mean, you can see it, but it doesn't shine where somebody can see where you are. And I looked at his eyes. He had a little red and green shirt on, a little button-up shirt. Had a little black pair of breeches on, shorts. And like I say, he's only 4 years old. He was only this tall. And of course, my training kicked in. It was the first person, human being, I treated in Vietnam. I'd only been there 4 days. And it was traumatic. And I, of course, my training, I first determined how bad his injury was. And I knew it was bad from seeing the place on the back of his skull. But then I took my flashlight and I opened his eyes and looked at his eyes, and instantly I saw that the pupils were huge. The pupils, when a person dies, their pupils dilate. They're 5 times as big as they are when you're normally. Or when you flash a light in somebody's eyes, they will get real small. But when I flashed the light into his eyes, they remained the same. The pupils remained the same. So I checked him for breathing, and I had a stethoscope with me. I didn't take a stethoscope into the field, but I did have a stethoscope on me then, and I listened for his heartbeat, and he had no heartbeat. And I tried to get his heart to start it again by compression, three fingers there, and I pinched his nose and blew fresh air through my mouth into his body, and there was no response whatsoever. And so I stayed with him for about 4 or 5 minutes, and I finally told the other soldiers that were there that he had expired. And I tried never to use the word "he's dead." I tried to never use the word "dead" when I was a medic. I would use the word "expired" or "he's no longer with us," something like that. And it's less traumatic for the people who are around me. And so then I presume it was his mother and maybe an older sister and a brother. They were only 7 or 8 years old. They came out of the little place where they were, and none of them appeared to be injured badly. I think they were roughed up when the little house-like thing collapsed. But and then I saw the trauma that they were experiencing to lose a child like that, even in a non-sophisticated place that was. But that was the most traumatic thing I had, and of course I was around a lot of young guys my age, same age as me. I'm a little bit older than most of the guys there I was with. I was 22 years old, and some of those guys were only 19. A few were 18, and so that was traumatic. But after that when I was sent into the field, I saw a lot of badly injured, dying, and deceased soldiers. And that was tough, but what you do in a situation like that, Sage, is you go into a different mode. Your mode is not, you can't concentrate or think about what their condition is. You're trying to improve their condition or stabilize their condition so that you can get them better help in a field hospital, get them on a helicopter called a medevac. That's short for medical evacuation. And I never served on a medevac helicopter, but some medics did, and that's all they did is ride around on helicopters and picking up GIs that have been shot and injured and so forth. I never did that. But you, as a medic, you kick in, your training kicks in, and you do what you have to do to the best of your ability. And the three great things that medics did, other than just, urgency, is establish an airway. Make sure a person's breathing, because if they can't breathe, doesn't matter how little or much they're bleeding, they're going to die. And then the second thing a medic does is stop the bleeding. And the third thing to do is treat you for shock. And that's the emergency situation. But medics do so much more. They are responsible for making sure you take your malaria tablet every Monday. The big yellow tablet, about big as an aspirin, a little bit thicker. They're yellow, and that's a malaria tablet. And there was also another tablet that we would give our soldiers as often as we could, and they were called a Dapsone tablet, and that treats for malaria also. And medics make sure that you use good hygiene. Try to keep yourself clean as much as possible. And they treat, if your feet start getting fungus on it, we call it jungle rot, because immersion foot. Immersion means to be in water.
Yeah, because it was really wet.
Yeah, the feet would get really tender. And then, of course, they would have leeches on them, a lot of leeches. And leeches, you can't even feel a leech on you. Anytime you go, if you lie down on the ground at nighttime, leeches will get on you. And they get in soft spots of your body, under underarms and other places, behind your kneecaps, and other places of your body. And they won't come off. The only way you can get those guys to come off is to light a cigarette and touch them with a cigarette, and they curl up then and they'll let go. But that's the only way I ever knew that they would let go. I tried salt, but you could never get salt. But salt will make them come off too. But the bad thing about salt is it gets wet and it can't do. But anyway, the medics do that, and medics treat scratches and cuts, and if someone has dysentery, they get sick from eating food, and you have to treat that. And you have you have a lot of moral support. The medic is like a god in Vietnam. I really had more power than no general had my power. I had no one. You don't in a battle situation. No one corrects a medic. Yeah. You can tell somebody, don't carry that rifle that way, or how come you don't have another bandolera of ammo across you, or this, that, and the other. But no one, I never heard one comment in a year that I was in Vietnam negative comment about me because I am a living God. I am the difference between your life and your death, and everyone understood that. So my circumstance was very unusual. And what made it more difficult for me was because I was a country boy and I wanted to survive to come back to my family. And I was deadly with an M16, a rifle, and I was deadly with a hand grenade. And unlike a lot of medics who were not in my caliber, if you want to call it that, I was unique in that I was the fastest person in any platoon I was ever with. I was the best shot. I was the fastest on my feet. I could throw a grenade faster and better than anybody I ever knew. I could hit this baseball cap at 30 yards. Nobody I ever knew could do that, so I was unique. But it was tough being a medic.
Do you remember the day your service ended?
You mean military service in Vietnam, or?
Just in Vietnam.
The Army, Sage, sent their soldiers to Vietnam for 12 months. The Marine Corps sent their soldiers to Vietnam for 13 months. And so I arrived, and I flew from Tennessee to Chicago to San Francisco. Then I stayed there at Army base there, Oakland Army Base, for about 3 days, and they give you preparation, and they issue your jungle fatigues and these boots that I have right here. Of course, you've seen that they've been in the jungle. They were really worn out, but I've kept those for you guys to have someday. But anyway, from the Oakland Army Base, we were transported by a bus, about 35 guys at a time, up to a place called Travis Air Force Base, which is just north of San Francisco, kind of up in the hills. And there we boarded a commercial airliner of 170 people or so. And then we flew from there to Anchorage, Alaska, which is a long ride. It was almost as far from Anchorage, Alaska from San Francisco as it was from East Tennessee to San Francisco. So it surprised me that Anchorage was that far away from California, but it really is. And then we got gasoline there, or petrol, whatever, and then we flew from there to Yokota, Japan, and that was about a 5-hour flight. And then we flew from Yokota, Japan to Wake Island in the Pacific. And then we got more gasoline, and we flew from Wake Island to Tan Son Nhut Air Base, which was in South Vietnam then. And it was just before daylight. We came in, and you could hear explosions all around. And when we got off the airplane, they had thrown as soon as they stopped, a bunch of Army guys reached into the hold of the back under the airplane and pulled out our duffel bags and threw them in a big pile. And then they had one guy just reading them off, Jones, Keller, Bolding, and I run over and got my thing. And then we got on a little army bus, and it had chicken wire on it, on all the windows, because the Viet Cong and enemy people would try to throw a grenade inside the bus and kill all the soldiers inside. So we had this chicken wire over the windows, so a grenade couldn't get through that. Now, a bullet could, but a grenade couldn't. And so we went to a place called the 90th Replacement Battalion, stayed there for a couple of days, and they sent me off to where I started to be. And then when we came back, it was the opposite. We come to this, you're brought to the 9th Replacement Battalion, and then they give you an order, another sheet of paper, and they put you on the bus again, and they take you down to Tonsanute Air Base, and there's a great big airplane there waiting to pick you up, a commercial airliner. And you get on that, all the guys got on, and as soon as the thing lifted off the ground, everybody starts screaming and yelling for joy. I just sat there. I didn't make any sound at all. I was just hoping the thing didn't get hit by some random rocket or crashed or whatever. And then I flew back home out through Hawaii and landed in Hawaii, and then from Hawaii came all the way back to San Francisco. From San Francisco back to Travis Air Force Base, but we didn't stop at Alaska this time. And then it'd take us by bus there down to San Francisco, Army base, get out of my jungle fatigues, took a shower. They dressed me up in this thing here. It takes them less than an hour to do that. It's amazing. I got all your medals and everything. All that sheet of paper tells everything about you. And then this one fellow and I went over to San Francisco International Airport to come back to Tennessee. And a policeman stopped us and says, "You guys," he says, "y'all shouldn't be wearing your uniform. There's a bunch of hippies out here." They call them hippies then. They were war protesters in San Francisco, California. And he had big long police tape. And there's a policeman on each end of the police tape. And so I says, I'm not going to do that to myself. And so we went up through there, and all these people, boys with hair down to their waist, nasty looking, looked like they had not taken a bath in years. And they were cursing at us and spitting toward us. They didn't spit on us because we were too far away. We were 30 feet away. And I don't know if anybody can spit that far. But I could have really hurt somebody. I really could have hurt somebody. But I knew that I'd better just get on in there, get on an airplane, and come back to my wife. And so, strangely, I've heard of people coming back from that war, and they threw nasty stuff like eggs and stuff at them. They threw oranges at me and this other boy. And where those oranges came from, I don't know, but it was the end of July. And maybe they found rotten oranges, but if I'd have had a baseball glove, I would have caught the oranges and ate them. But anyway, so we got on there, we flew standby. GIs were government issues what GI stands for, which means a soldier. We were permitted to fly standby for half price. But you had to wait until there was an available seat on an empty airplane that had one extra place that the person didn't show up, or they got sick and decided not to fly that day or whatever. That was called standby, and you'd wait around, and the person at the desk there would say, "We've got a standby. Anybody needs a standby?" And I'd jump up and got on the airplane, came back through St. Louis, Missouri, and then back to Tri-Cities Airport in Tennessee, and then Granny's first cousin, Jim, who had served in Vietnam also, picked me up at the airport because Granny was in Jefferson City with her mother and father. She was paying off the automobile that we had. And then he brought me home in Johnson City. And I took this off, put it in the sleeve that is somewhere in the house here, and I have not taken it out in all these years. And I took it out today so that you could see that. And I was in three different, I fought with 2nd Field Force. That was the main grouping that was responsible for me, and I think you have one of those hats. Firstly, I was with that non-combat unit. Then they sent me to a thing called 8th Tab. TAB stands for Target Acquisition Battalion. In other words, I was the medic for a 7 or 8 man team that was dropped out in the jungle, and we were in a silent stealth position, and we were observing the enemy. The Army had developed a little thing called radar, ground radar, There was a little unit that stood about this tall on a little tripod, and you could point it in any direction, and there was a little grid, and it would just show a little movements like that, and you could ascertain whether it was a lot of people, or it could be a warthog. They had warthogs in Vietnam. It could be a tiger. There were tigers in Vietnam. Strangely, it could be a water buffalo. Even in the jungle, water buffaloes were unique. They were ubiquitous, which means they were everywhere. And then I also worked with the 11th Armored Cav, which is a little tanks like guys. And they're really good guys. But then that was after I left the tab unit. The tab unit was very dangerous because there was only 7 or 8 of us, and we were in deep jungle where the enemy was, and we would have our night position and set out our claymore mines, a mine about this thing that explodes on the ground like that, and we would have trip flares and things like that. So if something came up close, we would have something to alert us. And then the last part of my time, the last 6 months, I was with a field artillery unit. And when you say artillery, most people think, well, you got it made if you're in artillery. Well, actually, you're in as much or more danger in an artillery unit than you are with the infantry stomping through the jungle, because the artillery, they knew exactly where you are, and those big guns were shooting. They were shooting a great distance and blowing up a lot of bad guys, and so they tried to destroy those guns on those little fire bases. And one of the best things, you said, what's one of the worst things that happened to me? This is one of the best things that ever happened to me. My platoon, the platoon that I was with, the TAB unit, reconnaissance team in the jungle, I was their medic, and it says right here, it says, I don't have my glasses with me, upside down, it says, to our medic, Buddy Bolding, 8th Tab Wolf Pack, that we were called the Wolf Pack, 2nd Field Force, 3 Corps, which means the 3rd part of the country. The country was cut into 4 sections, imaginary sections. I Corps was at the top near China, then 2 Corps was further down, then 3 Corps, where I was where the Central Highlands met the Delta, where all the rice was produced, and then 4 Corps was the Delta, and 3 Corps Vietnam, 1969 and 70. Well, this is only 69 here, but because I left that group before the end of 1969. Xuan Loc, Go to Ha, and Tay Min, and it says, "We love you, Doc." So that's one of the, and I've kept this now for 53 years. I've had this for 53 years, and you'll probably end up with this. And so I came back home and started my life again with my wife, my young wife, and went back to school and finished undergraduate school, then went to the University of Tennessee and did my graduate school work, and then started teaching high school biology and coaching track and field, later baseball and football and basketball, and then did that for 4 years, and then moved on to the college level after producing a bunch of championships. And then I worked as a college coach for 35 years at Longwood University, and then retired. And Granny and I moved here back to Roanoke, which is not too far from her home in Tennessee, and in the same area where I grew up. Not where I was born, but when I grew up. I've lived in Roanoke since I was 2 years old. We moved from Norfolk when I was 2. So that's pretty much my life in the military.
Is there anything you'd like to tell future generations?
Well, I can tell you this, Sage. All war is both unnecessary and evil. And there are times when regimes, groups of governments force people to fight. They force nations to fight in a war. And in those circumstances, I would be the first one to stand up and go. But I did not stand up and go in Vietnam. I was drafted. And strangely, I'm one of the rare people whose birthday is on the very first ball that was pulled out of the draft, like a big bingo game. And they have 365 balls in there. And they do it around like that, and they reach in and get a ball. And that ball's got a number on it. The higher the number, the less likely it is you'll be drafted. My number was 1. September the 14th was the very first ball pulled out of the draft in the Vietnam War, and that was me. But war is awful, and it serves nothing good for mankind. And it's the worst condition that is presented to a human. Why we are a warring creature probably has to do with our early development. You know, most people believe that we have developed from earlier forms of humans. And I believe that. I believe we were once, monkeys, if you want to call it that. We were early bipeds, things that walk on 2 legs. Instead of being down low on the earth, if you're a biped, you can stand up and see over the tall grass and see the bad guys. You can see the lions out there, and you can see the bad guys that are coming to get you. But war is awful, and I have to reconcile, or I have to accept what I've done. I never injured anybody that I didn't have to injure. I never injured a child or a helpless person. And I'm proud of what I did. But as far as war is concerned, I hate it, and I hate everything that it represents. And I would hope that the human species could develop to a point that it did not need to establish arms and wars to promote individual interest. People can make a lot of money out of selling bullets. But the old men make the wars. The young men fight the wars. And the old men, and a great majority of the cases, never come anywhere close to war. The last five presidents that we had in the United States were all exempted from fighting. They found a way to escape it. We call them draft dodgers. They didn't fight. They never fought any war. Yet they get all the benefits of a young man like myself fighting a war. And there were 58,000 plus young men and women killed in Vietnam, mostly men. Most of those young guys were under the age of 25. And they never lived long enough to have a family, a granddaughter. Luckily for me, I have a beautiful granddaughter. I had 2 handsome grandsons, and there's a lot of young guys like myself who went over there to that place and never came home. And so I hate war. Have nothing good to say about it. Nothing. Not one thing.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, but I thank you for this interview. I'm glad I've had this interview because it gives me a chance. It has given me a chance to review myself a little bit and where I have been, where Granny has been, because she participated in this in a different way, but just as much as I did. And I've kept these remnants of my past so that you and your two first cousins will be able to know that your grandfather was not a coward. I didn't run away. A lot of young guys ran off to Canada, left the country, that they were not going to go fight in this war. And they used the pretense, in my view, that they were doing it because it was the right thing to do. No, they did it because they were afraid they were going to be killed. And trust me, I was afraid I was going to be killed every single day. I was afraid. I was deathly afraid. Don't think I was some brave person. There's no such thing as bravery in war. There's only survival. And chance can kill the bravest, if you want to call it that, can kill the bravest guy and let the one who's the least brave come back alive. So technically I could be one of the least brave of all. In my particular circumstance, I don't think I was, but war does not choose who is to die. Chance, as I told you. Just, where you are, when you are, the way the things fall. Just like lightning coming from the sky and strike you dead. There's not much you can do about it, but I did do all I could do. I made every good judgment I could. And I will tell you one last thing. Psychologically, it's powerful, and I've tried to understand this all these years. I have no memory whatsoever of seeing the night sky. None. I have no memory of that. It's completely blanked out of my conscience. And I think that was because I remember seeing the sun. I remember the rain coming down, the monsoon rain coming down heavy. I remember helicopters, especially gunships, and that was another kind of helicopter. It was a gunship I didn't mention earlier, firing into the dark at bad soldiers. We used red tracers. They used green tracers. So if you see green tracers coming toward you through the sky, you know that's bad. If you see red ones, it's most likely good guys. But I have no memory of seeing the night sky. None. And I was in the jungle for the better part of 12 months, But I think that was because, Sage, I was so focused and at nighttime. That's when you're in great danger all the time, but especially at nighttime, because the enemy would come out of their hidden places underground. They had tunnels underground where they would stay during the daytime often, and then come out at nighttime and do ambushes and fire weapons, fire rockets and mortars and things like that, RPGs, into your positions, and then go back down. And I think I was so focused at nighttime that I completely just sealed off anything that I didn't have to hear or see. I tried to stay awake. I slept very little. And what I didn't tell you about was, what a medic carries. A medic carries a rucksack. That's like a big satchel on his back. And he's got bottles about this tall, real heavy glass. And they had intravenous fluids in them. Blood expanders is what we call them. And they were typically saline solution, water, with salt mixed in it. And you get those in a guy to keep him alive, keep the blood pressure up enough so his heart wouldn't stop until he get him to a place where he can get some treatment. And a medic carries bandages, lots of battle bandages with long strings on them like that, real big, heavy, like a ace bandage, you know, there's that kind of stretchy stuff. And triangulated bandages, morphine syringes, which were just kind of like about this long, and they had a needle on the end of them, and you could inject that into if a guy's in really, really severe pain, probably could even possibly die. But you shove those into the muscle, and it dopes them up where they don't feel pain. And they were like a little about the size of a blistex thing with the needle on the end and you twist them off. And the medic had fluorescent ointment, yellow ointment, it's like almost like jelly, and you put that on wounds, and that'll heal up fast. And of course, you have lots of water. I had always had 6 canteens of water on me, and the canteens were made out of plastic. They were not made out of metal. World War II and Korea, World War I, those were made out of metal, but ours were made out of plastic because they're much lighter. But I had 6 canteens on me at all times, and I encourage, that's another thing a medic does, is he harasses you anytime you have a chance to get fresh water from a water trailer that's brought out to you, or then you make sure guys get their canteens full, because water is something you've got to have it.
Yeah.
It's 115 degrees, and you lose your sweating. You're wet all year. For the most part, you're wet all year. You're either soaking wet from the monsoon rain, or you're soaking wet from sweat. So you're wet all the time. And medics would have some guys would just pass out from exhaustion, and medics would have to handle heat stroke and things like that. And of course you had a little poncho, and you carried your poncho on your rucksack that you can lay that on the ground at nighttime and keep the leeches off of you a little bit. And I didn't even bother putting a poncho liner over my head, because you're going to get soaked one way or the other. So I didn't even bother with that. And as a medic, I carried a lot more weight than most guys, because I had to look after, most of the time, my platoon was only about 25 guys, because there's always somebody being injured or killed, or going home, or got some kind of bad disease, malaria or whatever, and they've taken them back out of the field. And so medic has a lot of responsibility, and that bag is full of all kinds of stuff. And Band-Aids, really didn't have Band-Aids per se. We had battle dressings, and we had lots of stuff, scissors, and I had aspirins, things like that. Codeine tablets. Codeine is stronger than aspirin, a lot stronger than aspirin, but it's for pain. And so that's what I did. I don't shake hands with my granddaughter. I shake hands with friends. But I do love my granddaughter. She's the best. She is the best. And she has one of these. This is my United States Army combat medic, and you got to be special to have one of these, because of the medics that served in Vietnam, they're all very important, but only about 1 in 10 was a field medic.
Thank you, Granddad.
All right, so I'm happy about this.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.